So because this is Gimel Tammuz, and you heard my thoughts last week, so I had a lot more thoughts on Shabbos, and we verbringed on it, and I felt more and more that I should focus on the mitzvos in each parsha, because Jewish identity is I think I told you this, that there's a whole machlokus, a whole dispute between Maimonides and Chassidus. Right? Where Maimonides and Chassidus don't align is in what's the main aspect of life. According to Maimonides, the main aspect of life and what's left after a person passes away is his consciousness, meaning his dat. I'm saying consciousness, it's not exactly consciousness. It's what level of connection, mental, not mental, but intellectual connection he has created during his life with the divine. By learning.
Not by doing mitzvahs.
No.
So what's to do with mitzvahs?
It's hard to say that it's not connected to mitzvahs at all, but mitzvahs in a habitual sense, meaning that the Rambam sees mitzvahs as changing your habits, which changes your constitution. But it's not the mitzvah in and of itself. The Rambam sees the mitzvahs as means, not necessarily as goals. Okay? But the big deal is that even when he mentions anything in terms of in terms of what is left after a person passes away, so he calls it dat. And that dat is how much he knows God. So obviously you get to know God better by being a person who puts tefillin on. But it's not the act of the tefillin. There's something in the, if you put the tefillin on and you had in your in intent that what you're doing is you're submitting yourself to be Hashem's hand, to be Hashem's mind, then that
Except that we're all a kavanah in the world. We haven't done the mitzvah.
no. Obviously, he's very down to earth, but it's not, the mitzvah is not a holy relic in and of itself for him. It's a means, and then he's careful not to say in the Yad in his halachic work, but he says it very openly in the Guide to the Perplexed. There he says that all the mitzvahs are means to get you to connect to God, to connect to godliness. Anyway, nothing wrong with it. It's just the Chassidus sees it differently. The Chassidus says, no, the main thing...
Chassidus doesn't hold that doing the mitzvah as a means to get connected to God?
No, it holds it as a means to get connected to God, but that's not the main aspect of the mitzvah. The main aspect of the mitzvah is actually doing it. The mitzvah is something that came down from the Sovev. It connects you to what is beyond your understanding, not what is, like by the Rambam, it's exactly what you took out of it that's important. Meaning, if you did the mitzvah and it changed nothing in your constitution, as far as the Rambam is concerned, you missed the point. But in Chassidus, the very fact that you did the mitzvah, that's the main thing. Now, there's a lot of explanations why this difference in approach. In the end, both of them tell you to do mitzvahs, right? But the value is completely different. So the Rambam would never have a campaign to get other people to put on tefillin, because it would say it's meaningless. Because if they don't use the tefillin itself to change their constitution, and that's not happening when you just get a guy off the street nothing's going to happen. Yeah, it's very sguli. It's what we call, it's like a charm. It's not that the act of putting tefillin on itself suddenly awakened him in him his feelings of subservience to God. It works in some undocumented way that you can't explain, but it's not. The Rambam doesn't hold from that.
Sometimes people do put into tefillin, and it reminds them that
Okay, so now we're talking about Jewish identity. So the mitzvahs are how you build Jewish identity. I think that until this year I had this mistaken idea that everybody should become very, I mean, I know that wasn't true, but I still had it in, somehow as a working thesis that I couldn't get rid of in the background, that everybody should become very knowledgeable of Torah, everybody should become very knowledgeable of Chassidus, of Jewish philosophy, of this, of that, of the other thing.
Sure.
Can, but it's clear that that's not for this world. Maybe in the world to come it'll be that way. In this world, it's about identity. It's really about your identity. It's all identity politics in the end, but not in the way that they say it is. And the whole world is now talking about identity, whether it's sexual identity, this identity, that identity, because that's the other side of the real issue, which is Jewish identity. And Jewish identity, the Rebbe said very clearly, there's one way that you build Jewish identity. The most important way is mitzvos. And the second most important way is, I think we talked about this on Friday, is social identity. The person has to be connected to a community. If you're not connected to a community, your identity suffers.
But you said the world's moving away from identity.
No, the world is moving away from state, from nation states.
Everybody's going to be the same. There's no difference if you're black or white.
In terms of nationality, yes. There won't be any nations. But there will be a sense of identity. That's the issue now. That's what everybody is so enrolled in a very, very heated way.
They're gung ho.
Yeah. So, as we learn, I was thinking of Mamish asking you to switch to Derech Mitzvosecha. Yeah, but I thought that we should. I'm still debating about whether we should finish this cycle with Likutei Torah.
I did learn some memory from Derech Mitzvosecha many years ago, and I'm still distressed after all these years. At the very beginning, learning with Rabbi Shneur, very distressed that I never finished the whole book, and I didn't really understand it too deeply. So I'll be only too happy to do it.
So maybe in Bereshis we'll switch.
No problem.
To finish it at Derech Mitzvosecha in a year is a real challenge. I don't think it can be done. But maybe we could get through half of it.
I still really got the truth.
Just lemon water. So today, what I thought that in the meantime we'll stress the mitzvos in each parsha. So this parsha, there's only 3 mitzvos according to the Chinuch. So they're all related to Paraduma, to the red heifer. So I wanted to learn that with you, but the Maimarim are very, very long, and we would probably never finish them. And this we have a chance of. Azashir Yisrael Ali Be'er. So this is a song of the well, right? It's one of the 10 songs in the Tanakh.
This was after they squashed the Moabite
Right.
The caves.
Right. So let's see. Azashir Yisrael Tashira Azot. Then the Jewish people sang this song. Ali Ve'er Enula. Rise up the well, answer it. What do you mean? Enula. Enula is like a poetic, the poet taking poetic license. Enula is like, and here I say the song. Okay, Enula, answer it, which is like open up your mouth to speak about it. Be'er chafaru ha'asarim, karu ha'nedivei yam. This well was. How do you say? Bichot. Forgot. Was dug, but it's not the right word. It's a better word. You don't dig a well. There's a much stronger word.
Excavate.
What did Yitzchak do? No, there's another word we use. Anyway, said it.
That's what he says in the
So this well was dug by the ministers, Sarim. Karua Nediveyam. And those who are those who give in abundance also dug it. There's another synonym for dug. So what are we talking about? Hinei be'er nikra Knesset Yisrael. So he says the well that they're talking about here is the entire source of all the souls of the Jewish people. Right? This was it's a well. Like in the same way the well brings out water. So this well is the well from which the souls are taken. The souls of the Jewish people. כמו שכתוב בשיר השירים, מעיין גנים באר מים חיים. מעיין גנים means the fountainhead of the gardens, a well of living waters. So in Shir Shirim, when Shlomo Melech talks about the source of the Jewish people's souls, he's talking about this phrase, and he calls it also a well. כי הנה הבאר מים שנובעת מתחת לארץ, המים הן יורדים מלמעלה מן הארבע נהרות דרך סולמה לפרט, והערך על חולי מחלחלה, יורדים המים דרך גדי הארץ עד שנעשה מי ואר, שחוזרים ונובעים מתחת לארץ מלמטה למעלה. He says there's a whole hydrologic cycle in the world. How does it work? Rain comes down, the water penetrates the earth, it becomes undercurrents underneath the earth, and those are like rivers underneath the earth. They collect in certain places called the abyss, and then from the abyss they come back up as fountainheads, as well springs. Okay? So this is a very famous mashal in Chassidus. The Mittler Rebbe builds half of Shara Yichud on this parable, and really it's a parable for understanding how the crown works, but upside down. Okay, so here the crown is the lowest level into which the water penetrates, and then it comes out from there as a wellspring, as a fountainhead.
The kiss is the highest level.
Right. That's why we say that it's a reverse picture, because usually you think about, you would think that maybe the heavens are the source of the souls of the Jewish people. Here it says no. It's a different picture. When you're looking at a hydrologic cycle, the part that's on the bottom is more interesting than the part that's on the top. וכך כנסת ישראל היא מקור נשמות ישראל, היא באה מלמעלה, ותחילה הייתה מעיין גנים, שני גנים, גן עדן עליון וגן עדן תחתון, שבאה בהשתלשלות עולמות דרך גן עדן עליון ודרך גן עדן תחתון, ושם הייתה מקום עמידת הנשמה טרם בואה לעולם הזה, ושבאה בהתלבוש לגוף, נעשה בחינת באר מים חיים, שחוזרים ועולים ונובעים ממטה למעלה, בציאתם מנרתקה היא מעשר הגוף לאור באור החיים. So he says, so these two parts of the hydrologic cycle, where the rain starts on top. That's the soul before it came into the body. And then it came down as rain. And it watered the earth. That's like it watering the body. But that's not where it ends. That's the way most people see it. That the whole purpose of the soul is to give me life. That's how people understand it. And that's where it ends. He says that's only one half of the cycle. The other half is that it penetrates into the body, penetrates into the earth. It creates undercurrents.
Which you want.
We'll see in a moment. And eventually it collects in the abyss. And that abyss is really the crown from which it is then freed from the body when it comes up and creates a wellspring. What does it mean it creates a wellspring? That it waters its surroundings. Meaning, in other words, that the purpose of the soul is not to give life to my body, but when you finish the whole cycle, the soul is now here to give life to everything around it. Right? That's the Rebbe's saying that a chassid makes an environment. If you're a real chassid, you're a wellspring. I mean, if there's people who think that I have a soul, which means that God is with me. So now everything I do is wonderful. It's true. It's true. You're very godly. You sit and learn an hour a day, 2 hours a day, whatever you do. You daven, you do this, you do that. All these things make you into a godly person. It's very true. But without this other half of the picture, you're locked into yourself. And the whole purpose of the soul was not just to give you life, right? It's not that you have to do something special. It's just that you have to not ignore the fact that when it penetrates, if it really penetrates, when you dig this well and it really penetrates, and you dig this well to get to where it penetrated, you dig this well to get down into the abyss, you suddenly find yourself as a wellspring. Let me give an example of what I mean. I think I told you the story. It was by the Baal Shem Tov, I think 6 or 7 years ago. And he had this issue with somebody I was counseling. And it's a long issue. The bottom line was that they were orphaned at a very young age. And they were very rejected by their family, by their remaining family. They lost their mother, and then the father didn't know how to take care of them. And the rest of the family didn't know what to do with them. And I think that I don't know the family itself, but from all the descriptions, it sounds like the family had gone through some prolonged trauma long before this person was even born. And so there was no connection, there was no regular family bond. There was no real connection between the uncles and the aunts, even though they were a big family. There was no connection at all, and every connection hurt them. So it sounds like there's some kind of underlying trauma that they're all running away from. And so this child was pretty much abandoned. I mean, nobody threw him out of the house. He grew up in his father's house, but what it leaves is a hole in the chest, that you're never in your place, and you're always looking for somebody to embrace you. And even if you have the best, and this person built a very good life for themselves, but that doesn't matter, because they're always walking around with this tremendous hole in their chest where they feel no connection. They got married, they have children, and that they walk around with this every day, all day. You know, once in a while they kind of forget about it, but in general they always come back to it. So we worked on it for quite a while. Then I came to the conclusion that these things, they don't go away. There's no solution to them. It's not like because you'll go into therapy, into counseling, one day you'll walk out and you'll say, this doesn't affect me anymore. That's not going to happen. You're stuck with it. What's it like? It's like a person being born without a hand or losing his hand sometime early in life. Now you got to live without your hand. It's not going to go away. It's not like suddenly you're going to do something and the hand's going to grow back. There's no such thing. So the question is, what do you do with this? So I was at the Baal Shem Tov anyway, and I spent a few hours there saying Tehillim, and then just asking, give me, what do you do? Because you were an orphan. I don't know how you felt. He was an orphan from both parents. I don't know who took him in, who didn't take him in. I don't know. It sounds like nobody took him in. Well, it sounds like he grew up in the forest pretty much, and people gave him food. But he didn't have any relatives. We don't know of any relatives that he had. We don't know of a single soul that he had as a relation. So he really grew up by himself. So the answer that came to me while I was in the Ohel, in Mezhibush, was, again, it could be that it had a lot to do with what I already thought. The answer was that you can't get rid of it. It has to become the reason for which you do what you do. It's there in order to motivate you. It's not, the person who's looking to get rid of it will only be in pain their whole lives. You have to make it something that has meaning. And you make it have meaning by making it into a motivator, making it into a fuel cell. It's a kind of engine for everything that you do. And so the Baal Shem Tov's answer was something like, everything that I did, I was able to do because of that. Why? Because I felt how everybody feels and doesn't know it. That everybody feels estranged from God. That was in his time. So they're all orphans. They're not orphans from their parents, they're orphans from Hashem. And so I was able to give them this because I understood what they felt. But I understood it at a grand level. It's like, for me, this was a gaping hole in my chest. For other people, it's something they didn't realize that that's what they were suffering from. And so I brought them closer to Hashem. I showed them that Hashem is with them all the time. That was the nature of the answer. How is this related to this? When you dig a well, what you're saying is that the well is meant to allow something, the hole in the ground that you make is not for the sake of making a hole. You're making the hole for the sake of water gushing out. So when Hashem makes a hole in somebody's life, it doesn't matter what it is, what this hole is about. It could be their body isn't whole with a W. It could be that it's something psychological, it's something cultural, whatever it is. So that hole wasn't meant to leave you empty. It was meant to become a source of water coming out, of something for you to affect everybody who's around you. And that's a very deep principle in therapy that I very, very much believe in. That you can't you can't clog these holes. You can't patch them up. They're not meant to be patched up. They're meant to be a wellspring. But that transition is very hard for people. How do I turn it from something that's my pain into something that's my motivation? Okay. But really it works by you understanding that what you have, a lot of people also have at a smaller scale, and they don't even know that they have it. So Chassidus wants you to look not at the soul as coming down, but as the soul gushing up. It's a very big change in understanding. Again, it doesn't mean that the soul is not coming down. It is. It's giving life to the body. The question is, what for? Okay. So in the end, it's to create an environment. The whole purpose. Good. Again, to create an environment means everything. It's also to be makar of your children and your wife. No, it's the same thing. Each one is, by each audience, you speak differently. Okay? When it's your children, you're not there to tell them about the wonders of doing mitzvahs. You're there to show them the wonders of doing mitzvahs. Okay? Yeah, it has to be an example. It has to be something. But it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. Wherever you're functioning, it's your soul gushing up. That's the feeling that should be. And if it's not gushing up, what does it mean? It means that you didn't dig the well. You haven't truly excavated and hit living waters. So that's a very big premise that the Rebbe built most of his world on. So here he says Mayan Ganim. What does it mean when Shlomo Melch, when King Solomon says it's the fountainhead or the wellspring of gardens? He says wellspring of gardens refers to how the soul came down from above, because the gardens refers to the gardens of Eden, which we've already explained means pleasure. So the pleasure of the soul came down from above and gave to the body its life. And then when it says Ma'yan Ganim Be'er Ma'im Chayim, that it becomes a wellspring, that's already from below to above. So the Ma'yan Ganim is you're looking at the fountain that's it's basically going downstream, okay, from God to you, from the pleasure of being one with Hashem down to the body. And then Be'er Ma'im Chayim, anytime you mention a well, you're talking about water that comes from below to above. And again, this is a very simple image, that all the waters that you see coming up through wells they had to have started above. Okay? So any person who thinks about this for 5 minutes and says, what are the waters a symbol for? They're a symbol for life. In the same way that the waters give me life, they came from above, the soul came from above. There's the other half of the cycle, which is the soul then penetrating from the body and b'tziata min nartika, he writes here in the last sentence, ma'asar haguf le'or be'orach chaim. It comes out of its bondage, okay, in the body, as we said that in Greek, soma means jail. So it comes out of the jail of the physicality. And what's the jail of the physicality? That I don't care about anybody around me because I'm separate. My body makes me separate from everybody else. That's the jail of the soul. He says, and when you meditate upon this image of waters coming from above and then rising from below, okay, then you understand the whole seder, the whole order in which a person serves God in this life. Okay, how do you act as a servant of God? Because it says, והניחהו בגן עדן לא עובדה ולשומרה. לא עובדה במצוות עשה, לא שמרה במצוות לא תעשה. קיום מצוות עשה ושמירת מצוות לא תעשה, עובד ומתקן את הגן עדן. ועבודת הגן היא להשקותה, כמו שכתוב, ונהר יוצא מעדן להשקות את הגן, ובחינה זו נעשית על ידי ישראל למטה, שכנסת ישראל היא מעיין גנים המשקה את הגן העליון וגן התחתון. So he says, when Adam was put into the Garden of Eden, the soul was put into the Garden of Eden, what was it meant to do there? It's supposed to serve. It's supposed to la'avda u'leshomra, to work it and to guard it. And those are the two types of mitzvos. What are all these mitzvos for? They're for watering the gardens. So the mitzvos above, they are what waters the gardens of Eden above. The higher, the lower, whatever level of pleasure that there is. Okay? So the mitzvos above are watering the gardens of Eden.
But in the story of the Gan Eden, it was a Kodesh Baruch who sent the water down.
What do you mean?
Adam Rishon was born, and he saw that there was no rain, so he davened for rain. He davened for a gashmistic of rain. It wasn't. You needed gashmistic of rain to make the ground and
So that's lo daven l'shomra. That's to work it. Avoda, what is it? Avoda. Avoda is prayer. For us, it's a korbanos for them. For the previous generations. But that's exactly lo avoda. So he's saying the soul was put into the Garden of Eden to first of all bring the waters down into the Garden of Eden to water the garden. But that's all in the soul. And that's everything. You're calling Gashmistic rain, which is okay. But the idea is that's how the soul is able to create the Garden of Eden. By davening. So the soul in and of itself is prayer. That's basically how you should understand it. והעניין, כשם שבגן עדן צריך להיות בו מעיין להשקותו כדי להצמיח כל פרי שבגן, שמיים מצמיחים כל מיני תענוג. Just as in the Garden of Eden, again we're talking about the supernal Garden of Eden. There you need water, you need a fountainhead in order to water the garden and make everything grow. Because water makes all manners of pleasure grow. Now we understand where this came from. Right? He starts a Tanya with it. The first chapter of the Tanya, he quotes this. Where did this really come from? This idea that water makes all manner of pleasure grow. It's talking about pleasure is fruit, the fruit of the trees. כך הנה גן עדן צריך להיות בו בחינת מעיין, כי גן עדן הוא תענוג של נשמות שנהנים מזיו השכינה, שבא לכלול גילוי השגת הנפש המשגת באור אינסוף ברוך הוא. So the Garden of Eden is like an intellectual pursuit. It's when you understand godliness. So this is like the Rambam. Okay.
But where was Adam Rishon's Gan Eden? It was physical or it was spiritual? It's the Gan Eden that we talk about where the souls go back to, or somewhere else on this earth. So if we wanted to, we could get in that car and drive there.
So you tell me, if in the middle of the garden there's a tree of knowledge, so what kind of garden is this?
Regular garden.
Yeah, you know of a tree of knowledge?
The fig tree, Hashem said to him, don't eat it. I'm not allowing you to eat figs. There's a commandment to test them. It's a physical tree. He made a bracha on it.
Why call it the tree of knowledge?
Well, that's what Hashem decided to call it.
If in the middle of the garden you have a tree of knowledge, so what is this? This is clearly...
Knowledge comes from the fact that you do what Hashem wants, and then you become knowledgeable and understand. There's some things which Hashem wants, and some things He doesn't want. He wants us to work on Sunday. He doesn't want us to work on Shabbos. When you get down to the what's called the nitty gritty, you gotta understand why Hashem said the chicken is kosher and other animals are not kosher. There's certain things that Hashem decided. Hashem said to other Rishon, you can't eat it. Right? If you do what Hashem wants, you'll become knowledgeable. You'll understand that Hashem has commandments for you.
But you asked the question, is it something intellectual? Yeah. Is it some kind of intellectual, or is it something physical?
I think it was something physical.
So the stress in the story is that it's something intellectual, in my opinion. The pshat of the story is that he's talking about some kind of intellectual experience.
And it says that he drove him out, and the Malach stood there with a flaming
That's also
sword,
true.
so he couldn't let him back in. So it had to
Okay,
be.
so where is this place where there's a malach standing in front of it with a flaming sword that's flipping over, and you can't go in
It has
there?
to be something physical, otherwise there wouldn't be a Malach there guarding.
So you're saying this is written in language that contains both facets,
Okay, so
the
you
physical
want the
dimension.
Human people to understand.
Okay, but the main focus is an intellectual change that occurred. If there's this tree of knowledge in the middle of the garden, and he's told, don't go there. So it's like it's a type of knowledge which we call self-consciousness, right? You know yourself, that kicks you out of the pure pleasure of contemplating godliness. That's what it does. And it kicks you out so badly that trying to get back in, once you've been kicked out, is literally impossible, because you got this angel there with a fiery sword turning over, which is again is a very clearly not a physical.
That could be.
Yeah, it could be. That's clearly not a physical event, because there's no fiery sword that we know of anywhere. So the whole thing, like we said, it's a Baal Shem Tov holding the sugar cube, in order to feel the sweetness. The sweetness doesn't come from the sugar cube. It's not dependent on the physical world, but it needs the counterpart of the physical world. It's not happening necessarily in the physical world, but it needs to have a manifestation in the physical. It's a reflection, or like a shadow of what was going on. It was in the physical world. Yeah? I wanted to say something more that was very important.
You have answered the question, a burning question.
Yeah.
That I've always had for a very long time.
Yeah, I remember what I just said. Yeah, go ahead. Hopefully I won't forget it.
I always learned and understood when a tzaddik does a mitzvah in Yerushalayim, it has hashpah on the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And if a tzaddik drops one of his chumras, then what happens is a chain reaction where it ends up with a Jew in Los Angeles not fasting on Yom Kippur. And I understood it as a mashal, I didn't understand. But now you're saying that doing the mitzvahs brings down the gashmias, water, so to speak, into the world, and then it comes back up again and spreads out the whole water. That's exactly what's happening. That it's spreading everywhere. So it makes it very much clearer to understand the hashpah from people outside your environment. I don't know if that makes any sense what I just said, but
Something like that. I just wanted to say that. I forgot again. Yeah, that the fact that Adam was kicked out of the Garden of Eden doesn't mean that we're not in the Garden of Eden. It means that what is told there is an allegory for each person at every moment.
I've got news for you. This is the Garden of Eden. That's what's sitting there.
So I usually say that the Garden of Eden is when you listen to a mimer on Shalosh Shidduch and Shabbos. You know what? You don't even have to understand it. Most people don't. The guy's just reading from the text, and you have nothing on nothing in the world to do, just to listen.
That's how I react.
And then you eat from the tree of knowledge, because you start feeling yourself again. And when you start feeling yourself again, you're kicked out of the Gan Eden. You can't learn anymore. You're back into the real world. It's a very, very sad place. Then you have to work very hard. Yeah, you have to work very hard to get back into it. But it's not to be understood as we've been kicked out for good. That's not true. We've been kicked out intermittently, meaning we all go through that cycle, maybe 5 or 10 times a day, hopefully, with periods of going back into a state of enjoying godliness, intellectually and so on, and then periods of being kicked out. And it's true that we can't be there constantly anymore. That will only come back with Mashiach. Mashiach brings you back into a constant, permanent state of being in Gan Eden, which is why it's not a big mitzvah for everybody who's looking for physicality, for materialism. Okay.